There are 7 words that a lot of people can quote from memory, and they belong to a machine. My battery's low, and it's getting dark. You've probably seen them. NPR ran them. ABC ran them. The New York Daily News printed them as fact. They went onto t-shirts, into 1,000 memes, and onto at least one person's shoulder as a tattoo. Opportunity never sent that message. They are probably the most famous words ever attributed to an object. A small machine, alone on another planet, noticing the dark closing in and calmly telling someone about it. And the rover never said them. Not a paraphrase of them, not a compressed version of them. Opportunity did not transmit words at all, in that final contact or in any other, because that is not what a Mars rover does. What actually came back on the 10th of June 2018 was a burst of engineering data and one incomplete photograph. And here is the part that makes this worth 15 minutes of your time. Nobody lied. Not NASA, not the reporter who wrote the sentence, not the people who cried over it. The way that line came into existence is an accident so ordinary that it could happen to any of us, and what the rover actually said is colder, more precise, and in my opinion, much harder to sit with than the poem we invented to replace it. Opportunity landed at Meridiani Platinum on the 24th of January 2004, 3 weeks after its twin, Spirit, touched down on the other side of the planet. The mission it was built for was 90 sols, which is 90 Martian days, and a driving target of about 2,000 feet. That was the promise, 90 days and the length of a few city blocks. It lasted just under 15 years and drove 28 miles. Not 15% longer than planned, roughly 50 times longer. Think about what that number means in ordinary terms. You buy something with a 90-day warranty, a phone, a cheap laptop, a rental car, and it is still working 14 and a half years later in a place where nobody can service it, nobody can replace a part, and the temperature swings by more than 100 degrees every single day. And it did not stay pristine. By the end, Opportunity was a wreck that kept working. A steering actuator on the front wheel failed, so it drove for years with a wheel permanently turned, like a shopping cart with a bad caster. A heater on the robotic arm stuck on and had to be managed around. A shoulder joint seized. Its flash memory started failing, so engineers reprogrammed it to stop using flash altogether and operate on volatile memory, which meant it forgot everything every time it went to sleep. None of that was in the design. All of it was worked around from a room in California by people sending instructions to a machine on another world with no ability to reach out and touch it. And there was luck too. Every so often a gust of Martian wind would sweep across the solar panels and clean them, and the power would jump and the rover would get another year. The engineers called them cleaning events. Nobody planned them. Nobody could predict them. Opportunity survived in part because Mars occasionally dusted it off. Quick thing before the storm arrives. If you want more of the version where we actually check what happened, subscribe and turn on the bell so the next one finds you. On the 30th of May 2018, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter spotted a dust storm forming. Within days, it had stopped being a regional event and started becoming a planetary one. Martian dust storms have a mechanism that sounds almost deliberate. Sunlight warms the surface, warm air rises and carries dust with it. The airborne dust absorbs more sunlight, more air rises, and the loop feeds itself until the sky is too thick for enough light to reach the ground that was driving the whole thing. The storm builds until it smothers its own engine. Opportunity was parked in Perseverance Valley on the western rim of Endeavour Crater, and it was solar-powered. For a machine like that, dust is not a visibility problem. Dust is the thing standing between it and its only source of energy. Engineers measure that dust with a number called tau, which is atmospheric opacity. Above Opportunity, a normal day ran about 0.5. The big storm of 2007, the one everyone thought was the worst case, peaked at around 5.5, and the rover survived it. On the 10th of June 2018, tau over Opportunity was measured at about 10.8. That is past the point where the instruments could take a reliable reading at all. It's not dusk. It's not a hazy afternoon. It's what the mission's project manager described as midday that is as dark as night. Here's the analogy that actually fits. A solar eclipse gives you a couple of minutes of false night, and people fly across continents to stand in it. Now imagine that eclipse arriving and not leaving. Not for 2 minutes, for months. And there is one more number, and it is the one that tells you how this ends. On that last sol, Opportunity had 21 watt-hours of energy available. Before the storm, on a normal day, its panels were producing several hundred. 21 watt-hours is not enough to drive. It's not enough to talk for long. It's barely enough to keep the heaters running, and on Mars, the cold is not an inconvenience. It's the thing that kills electronics. So that is the situation the rover was in. Now the question this whole video is built on: if the final transmission did not contain the words everyone quotes, what exactly did it contain? Because the answer is on the record. It is public, and the raw numbers in it are worse than the sentence anyone wrote afterwards. At around 9:30 in the morning, California time, on the 10th of June 2018, Opportunity pointed the left eye of its panoramic camera at the sun with a solar filter in place and took a picture. It was not doing this for beauty. Pointing the camera at the sun through a filter is how you measure tau. The rover was taking a reading of how bad the sky had got, which is exactly the sort of thing it had been doing for 14 years. The image went up to the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter around 9:45 to be relayed to Earth. It arrived here about 20 minutes later, and it is almost entirely black. The sun is in the frame, filtered, and the dust is so thick that there is barely anything to see. The white specks scattered across it are noise from the camera sensor, which is present in every image the rover ever took and only becomes obvious when there is no light to drown it out. And the bottom of the frame is missing because the transmission stopped before the whole image had been sent. Not corrupted, just cut off mid-picture. Alongside it came the engineering telemetry. Power critically low, sky opacity off the scale. Two of the mission's scientists later put that data into plain language for a reporter. The deputy project scientist said it amounted to there being no power left, and that this was the last they heard from it. The project manager said it also told them the skies were incredibly dark, to the point where no sunlight was getting through, and that it was nighttime during the day. That is the whole final message. A dying power reading, an unmeasurable sky, and half a photograph of nothing. And now a detail almost nobody knows, which I find harder to shake than any of it. That partial black frame was the last image Opportunity transmitted, but it was not the last image Opportunity took. 3 minutes later, it took another set. It managed to send the small preview versions, the thumbnails, and then it lost contact before the full-size versions could go. So there are pictures sitting in a dead machine on Mars that were taken and compressed and queued for transmission and never sent. They are still there. They will be there for as long as the rover is. So if the rover did not say it, who did? A science reporter named Jacob Margolis, working at the public radio station KPCC and its news site Eliast. In February 2019, as NASA was preparing to formally end the mission, he was writing about Opportunity's death, and he had spoken to those two scientists about what the final data meant. And then he did the thing that science communicators are supposed to do. He translated. He took a power reading and an opacity value, which mean nothing to a general audience, and he wrote what they amounted to in a language a person could feel. He posted it in a thread, and he flagged it as a summary rather than a quote. That's not a mistake. That is the job. Every science writer alive does some version of it every week. The only unusual thing about this particular translation is that it was extraordinarily good. And that is exactly what killed it. Because a sentence that good does not stay attached to its context. It got lifted out of the thread and repeated on its own, and the qualifier that marked it as a paraphrase did not travel with it. Within days, it was being reported as a literal quotation. NPR, ABC, the New York Daily News, The Jet Propulsion Laboratory was fielding a flood of questions about the rover's final message from people who now believed it had spoken. Margulis ended up writing a follow-up article for Elias on the 16th of February 2019, explaining that his line had been a poetic translation of what two scientists had told him, and that the rover had never said anything of the kind. Snopes eventually published a fact-check classifying the quote as non-literal. None of it made any difference. The correction reached a fraction of the people the sentence did. It always does. Which leaves the more interesting question. Why did it spread like that? Plenty of good sentences get written every day and stay where they are put. Because we needed the machine to have last words. For 15 years, opportunity was a set of eyes we were borrowing. We watched Martian sunrises through it. We followed it across a plain, into craters, up a slope, for longer than some of the people watching had been alive. It had a mast that looked like a neck and a camera assembly that looked like a head, and it turned to look at things. We named craters after it and drove into them, and then it stopped in the middle of taking a measurement, and the ending we got was a status report and half a black photograph. That's not an ending anyone knows how to grieve. A 15-year story is supposed to close with something. So when a sentence appeared that gave it one, the sentence did not have to fight for anything. It arrived in a space that was already waiting for it. The myth is not a failure of understanding. It is what happened when a few million people needed a machine to have said goodbye, and someone accidentally handed them away to believe it had. The real ending is longer and quieter than a sentence, and it is almost never told. The storm cleared in the late summer of 2018, and the team did not stop. For 8 months, they kept transmitting to a machine that was not answering. More than 1,000 recovery commands sent out across a gap of tens of millions of miles on the chance that the rover was asleep with a scrambled clock and might happen to be listening at the right moment. They also kept up a tradition. Every morning of the mission, the team had played a wake-up song in the control room. So they kept doing that too, into the silence. The last attempt was made on the evening of the 12th of February 2019. The song they chose was I'll Be Seeing You by Billie Holiday. Nothing came back. The mission was declared complete the following day. Somewhere on Mars, Opportunity is still parked in Perseverance Valley with its camera pointed at a sun it could not see, holding a handful of pictures it never got to send. And the tracks it left behind, 28 miles of them, are still pressed into the dust, in a place with no rain and no rivers and almost no weather to erase them. They will outlast every one of us by a very long way. So, set the two endings next to each other. In the first, a small explorer watches the light go, understands what that means, and says so calmly before goes to sleep. That is the version tattooed on someone's shoulder. In the second, a machine built for 90 days works for 15 years, breaks in half a dozen ways, and keeps going anyway, and then, in the middle of taking a routine measurement of the sky, runs out of power and stops. No warning, no sentence. Half a photograph, and a few more it had already taken and could not send. And then a room of people on another planet spends 8 months talking to it and playing it music, and it never answers. The first one is a story about a machine. The second one is a story about the people who built it. And I think it is the harder of the two to sit with. So the question for the comments is this one. Now that you know the sentence was written by a journalist and not sent from Mars, does it change how you feel about it? Is a perfect paraphrase that millions of people believed a beautiful thing or a broken one? And would you rather have the poem or the black frame? And if you want the other side of that dust, something dark is spreading across the surface of Mars right now. It has been growing for decades, and nobody has a good explanation for it. That video is on screen now.